Good Thursday to you, everybody in COM 785. Welcome to week boom 3. How's everybody doing? I hope you had a blessed and restful Memorial Day weekend. Before we get into this video, little late morning coffee. There, much better. And it is I, again, your now sufficiently caffeinated communication instructor. Let's take a look at what we're going to do this week, and then we'll take a look at what you did last week. Top of the list for this week. Okay, the module's up, the readings are, like blah, 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 these pages. But I note from looking at the discussion board for your group project proposals or group proposal projects or something like that, that I only see 2 groups with a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. And in the class, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 people. Okay, so we have 6 signed up, but we have 13 enrolled. There's a discrepancy here. Listen, if you're not in a group yet, you must get in a group ASAP, like as in yesterday. Why? Because there's work that you need to do and have completed before you arrive at the residency program this June. Now, remember, we're going to be in Virginia Beach on the Regent campus. If you've never been there before, it's a beautiful, beautiful campus. Okay. I will send out details as to what we're going to be doing and where the beginning of this coming week. It is June 2nd. All right. And we'll be in classes from the 11th to the 13th. And you'll have to have a portion of this done. You're going to do a presentation to the other groups, and you'll hand the stuff to me. And I'm going to evaluate your stuff. And if you are not in a group yet, that's a problem. All right. If you have any questions about how this is supposed to work, and look, go to the assignment tab and look for the sheet. It says semester proposal project, okay, on it. But if you have any questions after reading that, please reach out to me, right? But you've got to get these groups together, everybody. Okay. So in addition to the readings and the discussion questions, every now and again, I'll throw in a chance to pick up some extra points, an extra discussion question here and there. And that is the case for this week. So, excuse me, in addition to the normal 4 questions that you'll see, question 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to see one that says bonus question. And this is yours to do or not to do as you like. If you choose to answer the bonus question, okay, respond to at least one of your classmates. And then if you want to continue with the discussion and respond to as many more as you like, that's up to you. For the bonus question, I have a link here to a piece that I wrote for a media broadcast that I was asked to appear on concerning vaccines and children. All right. And in the piece, I go through some quantitative research parameters, all right, and discuss how it is that some of the statistics that are used as part of the PR for the vaccines, not the vaccine, for vaccines in general, how they're generated and presented, and what are some of the issues with that formula that might make it difficult for someone to make a fully informed decision. All right. So as we're talking about PR, and especially this week in terms of the module and the readings, we're talking about research, formal and informal, and we're talking about ways in which research can go off the rails. All right, this is pertinent, so I thought I'd throw it in. Okay, so if you see the 4 questions plus 1, that's on purpose. But most of all, get signed up for a group. You can't pass this class without completing the semester project. And you can't complete the semester project if you're not signed up in a group. Okay, let's take a look at the questions from last week. Okay, see what you said. See if we can add anything that's of use to you. Now, remember, as part of the class, we have a couple of exams to pull down. Okay, in a midterm and a midterm and a final exam, and the questions for both will be pulled from the discussion sections, and not a lot, but some will be taken from the commentary here in the video. Things that we say about the stuff that we're covering. All right, so you want to pay attention to both. Okay, week 2, question number 1. Consider Fishbin and Alzen's theory of reasoned action and Pat Johnson's behavioral public relations model. Okay, that's in the Wilson text. Discuss what each of them is for. In other words, what's the point? Why were they created? That you really shouldn't use a preposition in that way, but that is the word for. Okay, but you get what I'm saying. Discuss what each of them is for. How might they be used, and whether they can be used in tandem or they are incompatible with each other. Okay. So let's see. Who do we take? Who should we take first? Benjamin, you are up here. Look like you went. You've gone last. So let's take you first. Okay. Fishbin and Alzen's theory of reasoned action is used to explain and predict how individual behavior is shaped by attitudes and subjective norms, which inform behavioral intention and lead to action. And that's exactly correct. If you look at the very simplified chart in Wilson, the question is in public relations, and likewise in any core form of strategic communication. What is it that leads people to do what they do? All right. So over here in my well-thumbed text, we have the rubrics. All right. That is the attitudes plus subjective norms shape behavioral intentions, which then lead to behavior. Okay. Pat Jackson's behavioral public relations model is designed to guide how organizations move audiences towards action through the stages of awareness, latent readiness, and triggering an event. Aha, exactly. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. The one that is Fishbin and I think it's Alzen's, okay, theory of reasoned action, informs us how it is this process works. The other is a model designed to move people through it. Okay, so it was a bit of a trick question. They are not incompatible and can be used together. Jackson's model sets the stage. The theory of reasoned action helps craft the message that moves the people to act. Correct. In fact, not only can they be used together, they're supposed to be, that is used in tandem. Okay, because the one describes how it is the process naturally develops. The other describes how it is that you move people along to the position of assent, saying, okay, yeah, we're going to do this. Okay. And by the way, as we continue to go through public relations and whether it's in for-profit or not-for-profit sector, the question comes up, and I've touched on this before, but I want to re-emphasize it. Some people say, yeah, gee, well, especially if you're reading you're reading Cialdini, like this week's readings in particular, in which he talks about psychological shoots. You go, that sounds a lot like manipulation. I don't know that I'm real comfortable with some of these tactics and approaches. Well, so that begs the question: what's the difference between manipulation and communication? Okay, and some of you have heard this before, but I'm going to say it again. Okay, the difference between well, let's back up before we give the difference between manipulation and communication. That understand that as entities, we are highly dependent creatures. That is, we are interwoven with one another by way of who we are, as we don't learn to speak and walk, and even these are just basic biological exercises that allow features and functions that are natural to us to come out. But then all of the social complexities, these are learned behaviors driven by dependence. In fact, and this awareness should be at the heart of our Christian worldview, attending to that dependence. In the case, for example, when you read scripture, one of the messages that you should take away is this is a hyper focused discussion about the relationship between the created and the creator. Okay, that's at the heart of what's going on through the Gospels. It is a hyper-focused discussion concerning the nature and all of its complexity of the relationship between the created and the creator. It's a relationship discussion. So from starting on that grand scale down to the much smaller scale, our humanity comes through dependency. And dependency, the acting on dependency, the manifestation of dependency, is relationships. So understand that as a foundational reality. All right. Therefore, people need, I need, you need influence to help us make decisions, to help us do what is in sometimes our best interest or the best interest of others. This is where strategic communication comes in, combining it with our Christian worldview. Okay. In the combination of the two, the necessity of communication and influence that is, that's the currency of relationships with our Christian worldview, all right, of service to one another. Combine those together. This raises the question of the difference between communication and manipulation. And remember it this way. Communication is when you take an action, and it doesn't matter whether you're trying to influence someone or not. When you take an action, let's say, in this case, to influence someone, in which you have their best interest and your best interest at heart. In one of the questions, and I won't tell you which for this week, you may pick up on some sarcasm from me. All right. And look, I'm staying out of the way for the most part of the relationship between you and the text. Okay. There's an example in this week's readings about a public relations strategy for a particular company that produces a particular product that I'm sort of hinting at, wink, wink. Not only do I not think this is worthy of public relations, I don't even know that why do we even have this company? What's its point? Okay. So in doing what's in the best interest, that communication is that you do what's in the best interest of them and you. That's communication. Manipulation is that you do in what's you try to influence them solely for what's in your best interest. And I believe it's not going to stop the world from spinning if we pose the question, but I believe, for example, in the case of the company that's highlighted in the text, who developed a communication strategy, a PR strategy, I believe in this instance, it's fair to ask, is the promotion of this company's product in anybody's best interest except for the owners of the company? And, maybe the workers of the company, because, the more of this product that's made, the more work the workers have. Outside of that, is this in anybody's best interest? I don't know. So if you toss and turn about the existential question concerning the difference between communication and manipulation, that I recommend to you as a starting point, as the bifurcating point. Communication is when we act in such a way with a regard for what's in the best interest of both the person and ourselves, because we can have our self-interest as part of the equation. Manipulation is a plan of action that is focused on our best interest alone and not the best interest of those in which we're dealing with. Okay. All right. Question number 2. Consider the 5 mental shortcuts on behavior listed in your text. Loss aversion, anchoring narrative fallacy, outcome bias, and confidence bias. From these 5, select 2 and like to 2 stories, which illustrate, maybe that's a typo, should be liken to 2 stories, one for each shortcut you selected, which illustrate the shortcut at work in collective that is more than one person's public behavior. All right, yeah, that could be clearer. I will acknowledge that. That's probably not the most clear thing I've written this month. All right, so in other words, what I wanted you to do was to take a look at those behavioral shortcuts. Select 2 of them. Now you need to understand all 5. You need to be able to give a definition for them. All right, because they may pop up on an exam. But what I wanted to do is to take 2 of them and maybe I take that back. I'm sorry. What I was after was link instead of like. Okay, link to 2 stories. Okay. That illustrates this, not just for a single person, but for a bunch of people. Okay. All right. Let's see what. Let's scroll down here. Benjamin, we took you last time. Let's take somebody else. Let's see. Tamara. In the book, Wilson et al. Discuss 5 mental shortcuts, loss aversion. I was particularly struck by the idea that people's decisions are influenced by the most recent idea they have been exposed to. Yes, this is true. Let me give you a little communication hack. Not just you, Tamara, but everybody. If you have unpleasant news to deliver, or especially if you're not happy, let's say you're in the role of a supervisor, or even in dealing with your spouse. Okay, there's something you have to talk about that's not good, right? You're like, okay, we got to stop doing this and do more of that. Okay. People retain, they focus on, they remember the last part of the paragraph that you speak. So if you say, and we'll just use spouses for instance, honey, I appreciate that you do the dishes, but you don't do them on time and they sit in the sink and the kitchen looks like a disaster. Right? And we split up dishes all the time at my house. Okay. Flip that around. Start with, honey, the timing in which you do the dishes needs to be better because they sit around the sink and the kitchen looks like it's a disaster. But I appreciate that you do the dishes. They'll retain the emotional impact of what comes after the but. And you can soften the, hey, we got to get this straightened out. And you're more likely to get a positive response. All right. So that is a very real phenomenon that you can use on a macro level. Okay. Which becomes the baseline or anchor for their decisions. This concept reminded me of athletes who are waiting to be drafted, may have dedicated and are you thinking of Mr. Sanders' son recently. They may have dedicated their entire lives to earning a coach's call and join the team, but negative information shared online can suddenly taint coach's opinion of them. Okay. Yeah, and in fact, indeed, you are. Mr. Sanders' attitude is like, and he ended up with the Cleveland Browns. Yahweh. Um, okay. Narrative fallacy, on the other hand, reminds me of thinking. Okay, let's see how you link this, Tamara. Cleveland Browns quarterback Sanders attributed his slide in the NFL draft to negative opinions associated with his father, Colorado coach Deion Sanders. Crawford, regardless of this accuracy of the information, the anchoring effect occurs, and this how it is now up to the quarterback to prove he deserves his place on the team. Okay, what I would ask you to do, and if I asked you this in, say, an essay question on an exam, I would ask you, and I mean now specifically you, Tamara, I would ask you to explain, you need to have more information. What was said about his father? I mean, because Deion Sanders has been very, very well received at the University of Colorado. Okay. Certainly shaking things up at that school. But what is it that is this anchoring event? And then how is it that you can trace this to his son's slide in the draft? All right. So look for stuff like that. Let's see, Valerie, let's take a look at you. Wilson et al., et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Loss aversion and narrative fallacy. Okay, narrative fallacies. Let's see. Despite where's this? Okay. Let's take a look at narrative fallacy, significant heuristic that influence public behavior, characterized by the tendency to construct coherent narratives that explain complex events, often at the expense of factual accuracy. Okay, which is all true, Valerie. But what I would want you to be able to do is to render that into plain English. I don't have any problem with you correctly identifying the term and with the appropriate professional language. One of the skill sets that I want everyone to develop in strategic communications is the ability to speak plainly to an audience. Because in my considered experience in strategic communications, what I found benefited me most was not my ability to define terms and use them appropriately, but to simplify what was at the heart of the meaning and communicate that quickly and clearly to those who were employing me. Okay. All right. But back to you. An illustrative instance of narrative fallacies event in the public backing of the 2003 Iraq War. The U.S. government developed a narrative asserting that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and represented in a threat. The narrative was straightforward, emotionally impactful, broadly endorsed despite lack of verifiable evidence. Okay, true. Although in this instance, I don't know that that might be the strongest example you could lay hands on. Insofar as the public was told that there was intelligence of weapons of mass destruction. Okay. Now, was there physical evidence? No. And in that instance, the nation of Republic, I should say, of Iraq, refused to allow inspectors into the country to verify the intelligence claims. So, okay, and I spent a lot of time in Iraq. This is something I'm very, very familiar with. Narrative is straightforward, emotional. The shared conviction in this narrative resulted in extensive public support for military interventions. Subsequent analysis revealed the flaw of this narrative. Nonetheless, this initial simplicity and emotional impact eclipsed critical analysis. Okay, and that is all true. That is in terms of how it works. So a little bit about narrative fallacies. Okay. And likewise, all of these mental shortcuts, loss aversion, anchoring, narrative fallacies, outcome bias, confidence bias. These are things that are baked into human behavior. So number one, they're not going to go away because they are intuitive to the behavior of the organism, meaning the person. They are as much a part of how people function as is bipedalism. That is that people walk on two legs. All right, they're a physiological, psychological function of the human person, and the reason for that is, um, the relationship between the brain and the rest of the body is a fascinating one on many levels. But the brain typically, depending on the size of the individual, constitutes about 2% of total body mass. Okay, very small. But in any given day, the brain consumes anywhere from 20 to 25% of total caloric expenditure that is just burned up by the brain. That is an enormously lopsided ratio for 2% of the body mass to be burning up 20 to 25% of caloric expenditure. The brain is hardwired to develop shortcuts in decision making, because any further expenditure, and from the brain's perspective, unnecessary expenditure exacerbates that already lopsided relationship between mass and caloric consumption. And if it gets any worse, I mean, if your brain had to think through all of the decisions that, I'm speaking as if it's a separate thing, but it makes for you, from running, the function of your legs while you walk, to seeing and reaching and holding a coffee cup. If you had to think about that in a conscious way, oh, you'd fall over from sheer exhaustion. You probably wouldn't even be able to get out of bed. So the brain has a vast array of shortcuts built into it. The brain is hardwired for mental shortcuts. And not all, this isn't all bad. Again, being able to just pick up a cup and go, here it is, without thinking about the cup. Being able to see a red light and have a reaction and say, oh, I should press on the brake, keeps traffic moving across town and people from, smashing into each other all day long. The brain looks for symbols, be they actual physical things, all right, and then establishes categories and assigns meaning. Now, when we get to Virginia, I'll explain why an understanding of this is important to you as a communicator, especially as it pertains to writing, okay, which is perhaps the most unnatural thing that we do, and is really at the heart of assigning meaning to symbol, and is highly culturally contextual. So if you understand about cultural context and the desire of the brain to assign meaning to category, you'll have a much better starting point in understanding strategic communication. All right. But the point remains that that's how the brain functions. All right. So these mental shortcuts are hardwired into how it is that we work. And, and again, they serve us well in some instances. In others, and especially, as individuals, you should be aware of that they work, because if you're not aware, then they can serve you ill. Loss aversion is one. You see this all the time. I mean, this is how people are often scammed and cheated out of their money. They get into a felonious relationship, and they think, well, I've given this much, I need to give more, or they get into a bad investment, or they get into a bad relationship investment. Okay, saying, well, I've put in all of these years, I hate to throw it all away. Loss aversion, okay, which is not necessarily in their best interest. Okay, we'll talk about more about that when we get to Virginia Beach. All right, question number 3. Consider Cialdini's story of Jim, the heat activated fire alarm salesman. Why did Jim attempt to gain the trust of those he was pitching of those, he was pitching the alarm system. That is, that's sort of a duh question. How did he go about gaining that trust? In your opinion, are Jim's methods ethical? Why or why not? Okay, let's see. Someone we haven't taken yet. Natalia. When reading, considering Cialdini's story of Jim and his methods of heat-activated firearm salesman, he stuck out in a dark. He stuck out in a dark-minded, strategic way. While being examined by a person of the company, examiner was persistent in the question as to why he was able to gain the trust the way he did. The person examining Jim discovered Jim's hidden reasons as to why Jim did not seem to have the title of being trustworthy when it came to those close family and friends. And deeper issues allowed him to come up with non-ethical ways of gaining trust. Due to the emptiness Jim must have gone through in life, Jim studied all the aspects of traits trustworthy person act upon these sorts of dumb. He also okay. Yeah, I don't remember reading all of that into Jim's profile in Cialdini, Natalie. Jim went about gaining the trust by pretending to be an innocent-minded salesman that had bare minimum mindset on the job. Jim timed even every move and communicated step he would make with the customers. Jim stood out by not bringing in books, which made him look more knowledgeable and professional as a salesperson. This gave a great impression to many of the customers. Every time, to many of the customers when he first stepped into their house to pitch the idea. Every time, Jim's trick was to wait for the customer to be distracted by the knowledge the test it would take. Jim would ask if he could step outside due to the fact that he forgot some important information in the vehicle. Distracted and focused on the knowledge test, customers allow him to leave and give him a key to come in and out of their house. Okay, now we're getting to the crux of it. Jim finally let out that it was how he knew he had gained the trust of the customer. Although the examiner saw this in an unethical way, in my opinion, a part of me would like to point out to the examiner that Jim is the highest earning salesman in the company. It is a dark method that Jim uses. However, looking at the bigger worldly picture through the lens of a Christian, sometimes people like Jim need to do what they can under the circumstances of their journey and their path in life. Okay. Interesting point. Okay, and Catherine, you fully agree. And then Valerie, effectiveness with all what must. Valerie disagrees in a soft way. You say effectiveness must always be aligned with integrity. Your analysis and intricacies of narrative was exemplary, excellent work. Okay. All right. So, yeah, in terms of this backstory about his loss and etc., that's not what we're getting at. It's the tactic of stepping out of the house and asking for a key that is the signal that okay, now they trust me. And so now I've gotten to the point where I can make the pitch. Okay. Is that ethical? Okay. I'm not exactly now, and by the way, when I throw you an open-ended question like this, that is, what do you think? I'm letting you think what you think. So if you had put this on an exam and said, well, it's ethical, I wouldn't ding you for it, but I'd ask you to justify it within the context of the ethical conduct, Christian conduct of strategic communication. And in this instance, and I'm speaking now about your answer, Natalie, to say, looking at the bigger worldly picture through the lens of a Christian, sometimes people like Jim need to do what they can under the circumstances of their journey and their path in life. I would not agree with you. All right. That ethical behavior is incumbent upon all of us outside. In fact, no, let's get as the expression goes, let's put the horse in front of the cart, that our path in life must be preceded by our ethos as Christians, that our ethos doesn't follow behind our path in life. Okay. But good discussion, good answer. Question number 4, according to Cialdini, how and in what way is his book Persuasion different from his book Influence. All right, this is one, sort of straightforward. Cialdini's book, Brianna, Cialdini's book Influence acts as an introduction or prequel to his book Persuasion, as he goes over core principles, reciprocation, liking, social proof, authority, scarcity, consistency in the first chapter of Influence. Cialdini explains that his book Influence is to teach people how to persuade others, which involves certain tactics and techniques, whereas his book Persuasion, he teaches his audience the science behind why these tactics work and the ethics behind each tactic. Yeah, very good. And he tells you in this book that influence was as much about the tactics and practice of influence as it was making you as an individual aware of how it is that these tactics are applied to try to influence you. And so you become aware. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Why do you want to go out? And why do you need my key? All right. Or I remember once, back when my wife and I we hadn't been married very long, and we were just finished with being students, and we were poor as church mice, and we went and to buy our first car together. And we'd been together. Went to college together. We met, I mean, by today's standards, I suppose, we met and were married early. My wife we met when she was 21 and I was 23, and we married when she was 23 and I was 20, just almost 26, not quite 26. But anyway, so we went to this car dealership, and it was this classic technique of scarcity. And we were buying this little red Honda Civic. And the guy said, well, we said, well, we like this car, but there was some feature about it. I don't remember what. Do you have that feature in that car? And he's like, well, just a second, let me go talk to my manager. And he left the office, leave us sit there. And he came back and he said, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know about whether we have this feature, but I just was told by my manager that somebody else is interested in buying this car, that very same red car. So in other words, first of all, he didn't answer our question about the feature being present on another car. And then he applied the tactic of scarcity, that this was going, gone. And he said, so, you probably should, he was very clever. He didn't say, I need you to make a decision. He said, you probably should make a decision quickly because somebody else wants to buy that car. And I happened, it was obvious because of the sign out front that this dealership was a part of a string of dealerships throughout the city that we're in. And I said, well, wait a minute. Are you telling me that this is the only red Honda Civic that's on any of the lots? And he said, without even looking, and he just said, yes, this is the last one. And the absurdity of that proposition, because, red Honda Civics were everywhere, immediately struck my wife and I, and we looked at each other, and I believe we laughed out loud, in unison, bah! And we got up and left and went down a couple of streets to another dealership and purchased another red Honda Civic with the feature that we had asked about in the first place. So in his first book, he's talking about how it's done, but he's also talking about how it's done within the context of, and I hadn't read Cialdini. I just knew it when I saw it. I'd been working in marketing for many years by that time. Talking about, what you need to watch out for. In this one, he talks about more of the science of how it is that people move to and through the decisions that they make. All right, good answer. Okay. Now, for some of these videos, as we get later into the semester, they're going to run a little longer than 20 minutes. I shoot for 30, 35. I see that I'm 3 minutes over, so we'll wrap up. All right. So readings, questions, bonus question this week. But most importantly, sign up in your groups. All right. You've got to don't make me email you individually. Come on, people. Okay. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. All right. I think about you. I pray about you. I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody in Virginia Beach in a few weeks. But till then, see you on Canvas. God bless.